Park. I'm in for Joe Walsh all week, if you can believe it. Tune in when freedom fights Fabian socialism at 5 p.m.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, coming to you live from Joe Cotton Ford and Carroll Stream as we're kicking off ticket sales for Freedom Summit 2018.
Yes.
This bombshell over the weekend from former Nuncio Vigano of the Catholic Church. He writes in 11 pages of testimony indicting the hierarchy of the church all the way up to Pope Francis. I had always believed and hoped that the hierarchy of the church could find within itself the spiritual resources and strength to tell the whole truth, to amend and to renew itself. That's why, even though I had repeatedly been asked to do so, I always avoided making statements to the media, even when it would have been my right to do so, in order to defend myself against the calumnies published about me, even by high-ranking prelates of the Roman Curia. He goes on to talk specifically about those in the church's hierarchy who covered for Cardinal McCarrick, the former Archbishop of D.C., who he alleges orchestrated the appointment of now Cardinal Cupich to be the Archbishop of the Chicago Archdiocese, that Cupich wasn't supposed to get that appointment, but that McCarrick, who served as an advisor to Pope Francis even after he had been disciplined by Pope Benedict, his predecessor, was responsible for that. McCarrick, who has been found at least civilly liable in a sense, settlements paid out for sexually assaulting or harassing seminarians. A lot of gruesome stories about Cardinal McCarrick and Vigano in this statement, if true, is devastating both to Cardinal Cupich, who gave an award to McCarrick just 2 years ago.
Oh, my gosh.
After decades-long allegations of sexual wrongdoing by McCarrick, and Pope Francis, who essentially resuscitated McCarrick's presence in the hierarchy of the church. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Mary FioRito, who is an attorney, former top aide to Cardinal Francis George in Chicago, and visiting fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Mary, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Dan and Amy.
So Professor Robbie George over at Princeton, who's one of the most respected conservative Catholic intellects in the world, said basically he doesn't know if these allegations by Vigano are true, of course, but that Pope Francis's response that he will not talk about it, that it's up for the press to interpret Vigano's statement as they see fit, is not sufficient, that he needs to address the allegations straight away and substantively. And I would suggest that if he doesn't do that, this is me talking, not Robbie George, if he doesn't do that, then he should resign as Pope.
Yeah, this was, my goodness, this is sort of like a DEFCON 1 for the church, isn't it? I mean, I could not in a million years imagine such a scenario ever taking place. And it seems like on the hour we're getting new details that are, equally shocking and horrifying at the same time. Either last night or early this morning, Monsignor Ransoum, who was basically the first assistant to Archbishop Vigano when he was the nuncio here in the United States. He had the position called the Charge d'Affaires, which would be sort of the second command at the United States Nunciature, released a statement saying what Archbishop Vigano claimed is true. And I have firsthand knowledge to back up everything he asserts in that memo. So for someone who would have had the direct knowledge that Archbishop Vigano would have had, and it's kind of important to keep in mind his reputation and his stature. He's widely regarded as being a man of absolutely impeccable integrity, a very smart man, and was also known prior to coming to the United States when he was working at the Vatican for trying to combat directly internal division, but also, some things that were going on with the financial dealings of the Holy See Bank. He was directly involved in straightening a lot of that out, which some speculate wound up in his being sent to the United States in the first place. But it was an incredible moment over the weekend. I agree with Professor George that the Holy Father needs to be more direct in addressing this, because if he knew, and Archbishop Vigano claims directly that he did, if he knew about Archbishop McCarrick and continued to let him function in a public way and to have influence over appointments of bishops here in the United States, those are very, very grave allegations. I cannot imagine, knowing Vigano as I have, that he would make them lightly. And I was speaking to my husband over the weekend, and I just, for me, I keep going back to what must have happened that prompted Archbishop Vigano to do this. I know he's getting on in years. He's 75 now. And, you're Catholic. We have kind of a phrase in the Catholic Church. It's important to discharge your conscience when you have something on your conscience that you feel needs to be made public for the sake of the Church and others. Something must have prompted him to do this, and it must be something very serious, because, again, this is a very serious man with an impeccable reputation, and I know he wouldn't have done this lightly.
Pope Francis was in Ireland, and he apologized for the abuses, but what do you think he knew, and when do you think he knew it?
Well, this is, Amy, that's the million-dollar question right now, right? I mean, it appears from the Vigano memo that he would have known, at least 8 years ago about Archbishop McCarrick, because it appears that Pope Benedict put very, very stringent restrictions on him and had essentially wanted to isolate him to a life of prayer and penance until he died. And it appears that was reversed. That decision was reversed. And so
it's actually worse than that. It's actually worse than that in Vigano's, I guess I'm pronouncing his name wrong, Vigano's statement.
Yeah.
He recounts just this past June a conversation with Pope Francis where the Pope asked me in a deceitful way, writes Vigano, what is Cardinal McCarrick like? I answered him with complete frankness, and if you want, with great naivete. Vigano telling Pope Francis, Holy Father, I don't know if you know Cardinal McCarrick, but if you ask the congregation for bishops, there is a dossier this thick about him. He corrupted generations of seminarians and priests, and Pope Benedict ordered him to withdraw to a life of prayer and penance. So the kind of playing dumb, if you will, is what Pope Francis was doing in the face of this evidence against McCarrick, the settlements that he most assuredly knew about, the information that Vigano had passed on previously, as well as others, I'm sure. So it seems that at minimum, Pope Francis was willfully blind. And if that's so, why would he be willfully blind against in the face of a predator like McCarrick?
Yeah, it's and that's again another $1 million question. It's hard to understand why he wouldn't have moved swiftly. I mean, Pope Benedict, for the sort of reputation he had as being this ultra right-wing conservative with no compassion, and boy, he had compassion for victims of sex abuse, and he moved against another priest, Father Maciel, in addition to moving on McCarrick, it appears, at the same time, and why the Holy Father would not acknowledge that and would not accept. It's very unusual for a pope not to accept the decisions of his predecessor in that regard.
So is there something Is there something ideological going on here? Is really the question.
It's possible, or as some people have pointed out, and I'm not sure. I don't want to offer this as an excuse or for it to appear, but in countries where the church was often persecuted, you saw this in Poland with John Paul. One of the tricks of the KGB, one of the things that they would do to Catholic priests, including one whom they murdered and threw in the Vistula River, they would accuse them of being homosexuals and being active homosexuals. So it's said that John Paul would always be very hesitant to believe these kind of rumors because he came out of that sort of mentality where the KGB was always trying to destroy the church from within with those kind of rumors. Now, I don't know in Argentina if they would have been subjected to the same kind of, tactics by the government, but, some of that cultural stuff does come into decisions when they're made. However, in this case, this seems to, if there's a dossier, 10 inches thick on a person with documented evidence, and, even just talking to the priests that I know and the bishops that I know, I've asked, did you know about the thing with McCarrick? And, a number of them have said, well, certainly I didn't know about anything that involved minors. And I believe that, but the rumors of his homosexual behavior were widely known.
Well, of course, there was
that's-
public settlements that were paid out. I mean, look,
Correct.
it's this like soft pedaling going on inside the church, and this sort of like, oh, I don't know what the culture is stuff from leading Catholics has really sort of become tiresome for me as a Catholic.
Right.
This is Vigano again, talking about the appointments of Supich to Chicago and Tobin to Newark, orchestrated by McCarrick and others. These are his words. United by a wicked pact of abuses by the first, meaning McCarrick, and cover-up abuses by the other two involved in orchestrating these appointments. Their names were not among those presented for Chicago and Newark. Regarding Supich, Vigano says, one cannot fail to note his ostentatious arrogance and the insolence with which he denies the evidence that is now obvious to all, that 80% of the abuses found were committed against young adults by homosexuals who were in a relationship of authority over the victims. Why is it the church can't confront that reality?
Well, yeah, I mean, you look just, for example, now look at some of the articles that have already come out, last night and this morning by some of the, the left-leaning enemies of Archbishop Vigano and of others saying, well, he's literally, they're going back to the Kim Davis meeting. Do you remember when Pope Francis visited the United States? And one of the many people that Pope Francis met and thanked for her effort, to protect religious liberty and freedom was Kim Davis. And do you remember how the left went nuts and tried to blame Vigano and said Vigano blindsided Pope Francis when that meeting happened? They're dragging up this to try to discredit him personally. But, that's going to be very difficult to do because, again, Vigano's reputation internationally is simply, again, to use the phrase, it's impeccable. And he's a man of tremendous integrity. And this is completely baffling. And, the rumors about, Cardinal Supich's name not being on the Terna, which is the name for the list of 3 names that goes to the Holy Father to choose from, I mean, those were circulating right after the appointment was made. And there's a Vatican correspondent in Rome, Sandro Magister, who even wrote an entire column on this saying, everyone here is kind of scratching their heads and they think Cardinal McCarrick has something to do with this appointment. So it's a lot's being exposed now. And, Dan, as a fellow Catholic, I think for the good of the church, it needs to be. We can't keep our heads in the sand about this stuff any longer. And that if there's going to be a purging, it has to be done for the sake of the church and for the sake of the people it's supposed to be serving.
No question. And it's conservative Catholics, particularly those of prominence like Robbie George, who we mentioned at the outset, it's their time to speak up or see the church gone, frankly. And if everything Vigano says is true about Francis, I don't see anything short of calling for him to step down. Appropriate.
One bishop has already called for his resignation. Bishop Strickland in Texas has released a statement to his priests and asked them to post it on all their social media pages for their parishes, saying these allegations are incredibly grave and obviously we need to investigate first. However, they have every appearance of being 100% true and credible, and if that is the case, the Holy Father has to resign.
And in Chicago, think about this against the backdrop of the CPS sex abuse scandal. We don't have a cardinal and archbishop head of the diocese that can speak with moral clarity on it because of what we know, or certainly what is alleged in the Vigano testimony.
It appears his voice might now be compromised, which is incredibly sad because, the Archbishop here is, because it's not a completely Catholic city, but it's a heavily Catholic city and has always been, a voice of unity, but also of moral persuasion on issues that relate to the common good, including the education of children who attend public schools. And it's really sad that that influence could be diminished in such a way that, he would not be taken seriously. It's a very, very heartbreaking day for the church.
She is Mary FioRito. She's an attorney, former top advisor to Cardinal George, and visiting fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Mary, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Dan and Amy. Have a great day.
You too. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro